Damon Williams felt his heart pounding as the elevator carried him deeper underground than he had ever been before. The walls around him were made of some black metal that seemed to drink in the light from the overhead panels. After 3 years of fixing broken machines and faulty wiring throughout the Verlaxian Empire's massive ships and stations, he thought he had seen everything. But this was different. This was the Emperor's personal palace, and he was going to the restricted levels that most people didn't even know existed. The elevator finally stopped with a soft hiss, and the doors slid open to reveal Commander Thek waiting for him. The alien commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, with gray skin that looked like rough stone and eyes that glowed a dim yellow in the shadows. His uniform was decorated with medals that Damon couldn't begin to understand, but he knew enough to recognize that this was someone very important and very dangerous. "Follow me, human," Thek said in his deep, rumbling voice. "And remember what you were told. You are here to fix the power systems only. Do not touch anything else. Do not look at anything else longer than necessary. Some secrets are not meant for your kind." Damon nodded and followed the commander down a long hallway. The walls here were covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The air felt thick and heavy, like breathing through water. Every few steps, they passed massive doors made of the same dark metal as the elevator shaft. Each door had different symbols carved into it, and Damon could hear strange humming sounds coming from behind some of them. They walked for what felt like miles before finally stopping at the largest door Damon had ever seen. It was easily 30 feet tall and covered in warning symbols that he recognized from his safety training. Danger signs. Radiation warnings. Keep out notices in dozens of different alien languages. And in the center, carved deeper than all the rest, was a symbol he had never seen before but somehow made his skin crawl just looking at it. "This is the primary vault," Commander Thek explained as he placed his hand on a scanner beside the door. "The power grid that keeps this chamber stable has been running for over 4,000 years. Recently, it has begun to fail. Our own technicians are too afraid to enter, and our automated systems cannot complete the repairs. That is why we need you." The massive door began to slide open with a sound like grinding stone. Beyond it, Damon could see nothing but darkness. Commander Thek handed him a portable light and a toolkit filled with equipment he recognized, along with some tools he had never seen before. "Remember," the commander said again, his yellow eyes boring into Damon's. "Touch only what is broken. Fix only what needs fixing. Ignore everything else, no matter how curious you become." Damon stepped through the doorway and immediately felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber beyond was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows high above. But what took his breath away was what filled the center of the room. A crystal structure rose from the floor like a mountain made of pure light. It had to be at least 20 stories tall and maybe half that wide, with smooth surfaces that reflected and refracted the glow coming from deep within. The light wasn't steady like a normal power source. Instead, it pulsed slowly and rhythmically, like a giant heartbeat made of energy. The crystal wasn't transparent like normal crystals either. Instead, it seemed filled with swirling patterns that moved and shifted, creating shadows and bright spots that danced across the walls. But as Damon moved closer with his scanner, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The readings on his equipment were all wrong. This wasn't a power source at all. The energy wasn't flowing out of the crystal to power other systems. Instead, all the power in the room was flowing into the crystal, feeding it, containing something inside. Whatever was in there was alive. The power grid around the crystal was a maze of cables, conduits, and control panels that looked like they had been built and rebuilt dozens of times over the centuries. Some parts were so old that Damon wasn't even sure what metals they were made from. Other sections looked newer but were covered in warning labels in languages he couldn't read. He found the problem quickly enough. One of the main power couplings was overloading, sending dangerous surges through the entire system. The metal housing was glowing red-hot and sparking dangerously. If it failed completely, the entire containment grid would collapse. Damon set down his toolkit and began working, carefully disconnecting the damaged coupling. But as he worked, he couldn't help but notice that the crystal's pulsing was getting faster. Whatever was inside seemed to know that its prison was weakening. That's when disaster struck. Without warning, the damaged coupling exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. Damon threw himself backward, but he could see that the explosion had damaged other systems too. Warning lights began flashing all around the chamber, and a low alarm began to sound. The crystal's pulsing became frantic, and cracks began to appear in its surface. Damon could see that the containment field was collapsing. Without thinking, he reached out toward what looked like an emergency stabilizer, trying to prevent a complete system failure. That's when he heard the voice behind him, filled with more terror than he had ever heard from anyone. "Don't touch that." Emperor Vex himself had burst through the vault doors, his royal robes flowing behind him like wings. His face, usually calm and controlled, was twisted with absolute panic. But it was too late. Damon's hand was already making contact with the crystal surface. The moment his skin touched the smooth, warm surface, everything changed. Light erupted from the crystal like a nuclear explosion, filling the chamber with blinding radiance. Damon felt electricity course through his body, but instead of pain, he felt something else. A presence. A mind so vast and ancient that it made him feel like an ant trying to understand the ocean. And deep within the crystal, something that had been sleeping for thousands of years began to wake up. The light faded slowly, leaving Damon blinking and trying to clear his vision. But what he saw when his eyes adjusted made him question whether he was still awake or trapped in some impossible dream. The crystal that had towered over him just moments before was cracking apart, piece by piece, like a massive egg hatching after waiting centuries to break free. Each crack that spread across the crystal's surface released more of that strange, pulsing light. The sound was unlike anything Damon had ever heard, not the sharp crack of breaking glass, but something softer and more organic, like the sound of a flower blooming magnified 1,000 times. As the pieces fell away, they didn't shatter on the ground. Instead, they dissolved into streams of pure energy that flowed back toward whatever was emerging from inside. What came out of that crystal prison was beyond anything Damon could have imagined, even in his wildest science fiction dreams. At first, he could only see parts of it through the gaps in the breaking crystal shell. A surface that looked like polished metal, but moved and shifted like living skin. Patterns that flowed across that surface like veins filled with glowing liquid. And then, as more of the crystal fell away, he began to understand the true size of what had been hidden in this vault. The creature was enormous. Not just big, but truly massive in a way that made Damon feel like an ant standing next to a skyscraper. As it began to unfold itself from the cramped space where it had been sleeping, he realized it had to be at least as large as 10 city blocks placed side by side. Maybe larger. The ceiling of the vault, which had seemed impossibly high when he first entered, barely contained the creature as it slowly stretched upward. But the size wasn't the most incredible thing about it. What really took Damon's breath away was how it looked like nothing he had ever seen, yet somehow felt familiar at the same time. Parts of it were clearly mechanical, he could see what looked like advanced circuits running beneath its surface, and components that reminded him of the most sophisticated machinery he had ever worked on. But other parts were unmistakably alive. The surface rippled and moved like muscle tissue, and he could see what looked like a nervous system spreading throughout its body, carrying pulses of light like electrical signals in a brain. The creature's head, if that's what it was, turned slowly toward him. It didn't have eyes in any way that Damon recognized, but he could feel its attention focusing on him like a spotlight. And that's when something even more impossible happened. Without any warning, without any preparation, Damon suddenly found himself connected to the creature's mind. It wasn't like hearing a voice or seeing images. Instead, it was like having thoughts that weren't his own suddenly appearing in his head. Memories that belonged to someone else flashed through his consciousness. He saw worlds that had never known the warmth of a sun suddenly blooming with life. Barren planets transformed into gardens in a matter of hours. Entire solar systems reshaped and rebuilt to support countless forms of life. But these weren't memories of destruction or conquest. They were memories of creation, of building, of bringing life to places where none had existed before. Through this strange connection, Damon began to understand what this creature really was. Not a weapon designed for war, not a monster created to destroy, but something far more incredible. It was a builder, a gardener working on a scale that spanned entire worlds. The voice, when it finally spoke directly to him, was like nothing he had ever experienced. It didn't come through his ears, but seemed to resonate inside his skull, gentle but impossibly vast, like hearing the whisper of an ocean. Asterisk so long asterisk it said, and Damon could feel the weight of centuries in those words. Asterisk so very long since I felt a mind that could truly understand what I am. Asterisk. As the creature fully emerged from its crystal prison, Damon realized that it was studying him just as intensely as he was studying it. But there was no threat in that attention, no sense of danger. Instead, there was something that felt almost like relief, like a person who had been alone for years suddenly finding another human being to talk to. Through their connection, he began to understand more about what this creature was and where it had come from. It had been built by a race so ancient that they had disappeared millions of years before humans had even learned to make fire. These builders had created the Titan not as a slave or a tool, but as a partner in their greatest work, bringing life and civilization to every corner of the galaxy. But something had gone wrong. The ancient builders had vanished, leaving their creation alone and purposeless. Other races had found the Titan over the millennia, but none of them had understood what it really was. They saw its incredible power and tried to control it, to use it as a weapon or to command it like a machine. When the Titan refused to be used for destruction, they had feared it instead. The Verlaxians had been just the latest in a long line of species who chose to imprison what they couldn't understand. They had built their entire empire around keeping the Titan contained, using its presence as a source of fear to control their own people. But now, as the creature's massive head tilted toward him with something that felt remarkably like curiosity, Damon realized that he represented something the Titan had been searching for across countless centuries. Not masters who wanted to command it, not servants who would cower before its power, but true partners who could work alongside it as equals. The Titan had been waiting, patient as stone, for a species mature enough to understand that the greatest power in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy, but the ability to create. Emperor Vex stood frozen in the doorway of the vault, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. His scaled skin, normally a dignified deep green, had turned an almost sickly yellow color that Damon had never seen before. The Emperor's hands were shaking as he pointed at the massive creature that now filled most of the chamber, and when he finally found his voice, it came out as a strangled scream. "You have doomed us all," he raged, his carefully controlled royal accent cracking with raw terror. "You foolish, ignorant human. Do you have any idea what you've awakened? Do you understand what you've unleashed upon the galaxy?" Behind the Emperor, Damon could see Commander Thek and a dozen other Verlaxian guards, but none of them dared to step into the chamber. They all pressed themselves against the walls of the corridor, as far from the Titan as they could get while still being able to see what was happening. Their weapons were drawn, but Damon noticed that their hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. The Emperor's rage seemed to give him courage that his guards lacked. He stepped fully into the vault, though he stayed as close to the exit as possible, and began to pace back and forth like a caged animal. His royal robes, usually so perfectly arranged, were disheveled and torn from his rush to reach the vault. 4,000 years. Emperor Vex shouted, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. 4,000 years my ancestors have kept this thing contained. 4,000 years of careful planning, of building our entire civilization around making sure it never woke up. And you've destroyed it all in a single moment of human stupidity. Damon wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had only been trying to prevent a system failure, but the words died in his throat as he began to understand what the Emperor was really saying. The Verlaxian Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, hadn't built their strength through superior technology or military might. They had built it through fear. "You want to know the truth?" the Emperor continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to know how the Verlaxian Empire really became the dominant force in this galaxy? It wasn't through conquest or superior breeding or divine right. It was because we found this thing sleeping in the ruins of a dead world, and we were smart enough to be afraid of it." The Emperor gestured wildly at the Titan, which was now fully upright and examining its surroundings with what seemed like mild curiosity. "We studied it for centuries before we dared to move it. We learned what it could do, what it was designed for. And we realized that if it ever woke up, everything we had built would become meaningless." As if to demonstrate the Emperor's point, the Titan began to interact with the palace's systems in ways that should have been impossible. Damon watched in amazement as the creature simply reached out with what looked like tendrils of pure energy and connected itself to the power grid, the communications network, and the environmental controls all at once. The walls around them began to change. Not breaking or cracking, but actually reshaping themselves at a level so basic that Damon's mind struggled to understand it. He watched stone flow like water, rearranging its molecular structure to create new patterns and configurations. The lighting in the chamber didn't just get brighter, the walls themselves began to glow with a soft, warm radiance that felt more natural than any artificial illumination he had ever seen. The Titan was rewriting the very atoms that made up the palace, and it was doing it as casually as a human might rearrange furniture in their living room. The energy required for such manipulation should have drained the power reserves of an entire planet, but the creature seemed to be generating more energy than it was using, effortlessly tapping into forces that Verlaxian science couldn't even detect, much less harness. "Do you see now?" Emperor Vex demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "This thing can reshape matter at the atomic level. It can generate unlimited energy from nothing. It can terraform entire worlds in a matter of hours. What do you think happens to our carefully controlled expansion when any dead rock in space can be turned into a paradise overnight? But even as the Emperor ranted about the destruction of his empire, Damon was experiencing something completely different through his connection with the Titan. He could feel the creature's emotions, its thoughts, its intentions. And what he felt wasn't the cold calculation of a destroyer or the hunger for power of a conqueror. Instead, he felt something that made his heart ache with sympathy. Loneliness. Deep, overwhelming loneliness that had lasted for thousands upon thousands of years. The Titan had been alone for so long that it had almost forgotten what it felt like to have another mind truly understand it. I was made to create, the creature's voice whispered in Damon's mind, and he could feel the weight of frustrated purpose behind those words. My builders designed me to bring life to empty worlds, to help civilizations grow and flourish. But every species that found me saw only power to be controlled or threats to be contained. Through their connection, the Titan shared more of its memories with Damon. He saw civilizations that had tried to turn it into a weapon of war, demanding that it use its terraforming abilities to make enemy worlds uninhabitable. He saw others that had tried to worship it as a god, building temples around its sleeping form and offering sacrifices that it had never wanted. And he saw still others, like the Vrelaxians, who had been so afraid of change that they chose to lock it away rather than try to understand it. They never listened. The Titan continued, its mental voice heavy with centuries of disappointment. They saw what I could do and imagined only how it could serve their existing plans. None of them ever asked what I wanted to do, what I was designed to do. None of them ever wanted to be true partners in creation. The Emperor was still ranting about the collapse of Vrelaxian power, but Damon was no longer listening. Instead, he was beginning to understand something that filled him with excitement rather than fear. The Titan hadn't been waiting for masters to command it or subjects to rule over. It had been waiting for partners, for a species mature enough to work alongside it rather than trying to control it. And somehow, in ways he was only beginning to understand, it had recognized something in human nature that gave it hope for the first time in millennia. The palace communication systems lit up like a Christmas tree within the first hour. Despite Emperor Vex's desperate attempts to cut off all outgoing transmissions, the news was already spreading faster than wildfire across the galaxy. The Titan's awakening had created energy signatures so massive that they couldn't be hidden. Every deep space monitoring station, every military outpost, and every research facility with advanced sensors had detected the unprecedented power surge coming from the Vrelaxian homeworld. Damon watched through the palace's main display screens as emergency broadcasts began flooding every communication channel. The Galactic News Network was already running breaking news alerts with headlines like Ancient Weapon Awakens and Vrelaxian Secret Threatens Galaxy. But even more concerning were the military communications that Commander Thek was monitoring from his portable command unit. 12 different battle fleets are already changing course toward our system, the commander reported to Emperor Vex, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The Corvathian Armada, the Zendari War Fleet, the Hegemony Strike Force, they're all mobilizing everything they have. The Emperor's face had gone from yellow to an almost ghostly white. How long do we have? The fastest ships will reach us in 18 hours. The main fleets will arrive within 3 days. But Damon wasn't paying attention to the military preparations happening around him. Through his connection with the Titan, he was experiencing something far more incredible. The ancient creature was sharing its memories with him, showing him glimpses of a past that stretched back millions of years. He saw worlds that had started as nothing but dead rock floating in space, completely lifeless and barren. Then he watched as the Titan worked its incredible magic, reshaping the very atoms that made up those planets. Oceans formed from hydrogen and oxygen pulled from the cosmic dust. Atmospheres developed as the creature carefully balanced gases to create perfect breathing conditions. And finally, life itself emerged, not just simple organisms, but complex ecosystems with plants, animals, and eventually intelligent species. But the most amazing part wasn't the transformation of the worlds themselves. It was what happened to the civilizations that lived on them. The Titan didn't just create habitable planets, it helped the species that lived there grow and develop in ways they never could have achieved alone. Through the creature's guidance, societies that might have taken thousands of years to develop advanced technology accomplished it in mere decades. Yet every single memory ended the same way. The species would reach a certain level of development, and then they would start to see the Titan not as a partner, but as a tool to be controlled. They would demand that it use its power to give them advantages over their neighbors. They would want it to make their enemies' worlds uninhabitable, or to create impossible weapons that would make them invincible in war. Always the same pattern, Asterisk the Titan communicated sadly as it shared another memory of a civilization that had tried to force it into military service. Asterisk they would grow and learn and create wonderful things. But then they would see my power and think only of how to use it against others. Asterisk. But humans are different, aren't we? Damon asked, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt so confident about that. The Titan's massive form shifted slightly, and Damon felt something that might have been amusement flowing through their connection. Asterisk very different. I have been studying your species since the first human left your home planet. Your minds work in ways I have never encountered before. Asterisk. Through their link, the Titan began to show Damon what it meant. Human brains, it explained, had evolved in a unique way. While most intelligent species developed either logical, methodical thinking or creative, intuitive problem-solving, humans had somehow managed to develop both capabilities in the same mind. They could analyze problems with scientific precision, but then make creative leaps that seemed to come from nowhere. Asterisk watch how you think, asterisk the Titan suggested, and suddenly Damon became aware of his own thought processes in a way he never had before. He could feel how his mind would examine a problem from multiple angles simultaneously, how it would combine seemingly unrelated ideas to create new solutions, how it would adapt and change approaches when the first attempt didn't work. Most species think in straight lines, the Titan explained. They identify a problem, develop a solution, and implement it. If the solution doesn't work, they develop another solution using the same process. But humans think in spirals. You approach problems from unexpected directions. You combine ideas that shouldn't work together. You find solutions that no logical analysis would ever suggest. Damon was beginning to understand. The Titan's intelligence was vast and powerful, but it was also methodical and systematic. It could analyze any problem and develop a perfect solution, but only if it approached the problem in ways it had been programmed to consider. Human creativity could provide the spark of inspiration that would let the Titan see problems from completely new perspectives. Asterisk together, asterisk the Titan continued, asterisk we can accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. My power and knowledge, combined with your creativity and adaptability. We can create not just worlds, but entirely new ways of thinking about what civilization can become. Asterisk. The first alien scout ships were already entering the outer edge of the solar system, their sensors scanning for any sign of weakness or opportunity. Some of them were broadcasting demands for the immediate surrender of the weapon, while others were simply preparing to attack anything that moved. But Damon wasn't afraid. Through his connection with the Titan, he could feel the creature's confidence, its quiet certainty that they could handle whatever was coming. Not through violence or destruction, but by showing the galaxy something it had never seen before, a demonstration of what was possible when power was used for creation instead of conquest. Are you ready to change everything? The Titan asked him. Damon looked out at the approaching fleets, at the Emperor's panicking guards, at the communication screens filled with threats and demands for surrender. Then he looked up at his enormous partner and smiled. Let's show them what humans and Titans can build together. The first alien warship dropped out of hyperspace just as Damon and the Titan began to work as one mind, preparing to offer the galaxy a choice between the old ways of fear and conflict, and a new future of unlimited possibility. The space around the Verlaxian homeworld had never seen anything like it. What started as empty darkness was now filled with the lights of hundreds of warships from every corner of the galaxy. The massive vessels hung in space like metal mountains, their weapons charged and ready, creating a deadly constellation around the planet where Damon and the Titan waited. Admiral Korath of the Hegemony Fleet was the first to break the tense silence that had settled over the system. His voice crackled through the communication channels, reaching every ship in the assembled armada. This is Admiral Korath to all vessels. We have confirmed the presence of a Class X ancient weapon on the planet's surface. All fleets will coordinate for immediate planetary bombardment unless the weapon is surrendered within 1 standard hour. But before anyone could respond, 12 other fleet commanders began talking at once, each one demanding that the Titan be handed over to their specific civilization. The Zendari claimed that their ancient texts mentioned the creature, giving them rightful ownership. The Corvathians insisted that their superior military strength made them the only ones capable of safely containing it. The Nexus Collective argued that their advanced technology meant they were the logical choice to study and control the Titan. Down on the planet's surface, Emperor Vex was having his own crisis. His personal guard had surrounded the palace, but they weren't pointing their weapons outward at the approaching fleets. Instead, they were aiming directly at the throne room where the Titan had emerged. The Emperor's own military advisors were recommending that they destroy the palace completely rather than let any other civilization claim the prize. Your Imperial Majesty, General Voss said, his voice steady despite the sweat pouring down his face. "We have enough firepower targeted at this location to turn the entire palace into vapor. If we cannot control the weapon, at least we can prevent our enemies from claiming it." Emperor Vex stood at the window of his command center, looking down at the massive form of the Titan that filled the palace courtyard. His empire, built on 4,000 years of careful control and manipulation, was crumbling around him. Everything his ancestors had worked to build was about to be destroyed, either by alien invaders or by his own desperate military response. But in the chamber below, Damon wasn't thinking about politics or military strategy. Through his connection with the Titan, he could feel the sadness that the ancient creature experienced every time this happened. Once again, powerful civilizations were gathering to fight over the right to control it, to use it as a weapon or tool, without anyone even asking what it actually wanted to do. "They're all making the same mistake," Damon said quietly, placing his hand on the Titan's surface. "They see your power and immediately think about how to use it for themselves." "Yes," the Titan replied, its mental voice heavy with centuries of disappointment. "But perhaps this time can be different. Perhaps this time, we can show them what I was truly made for. What do you need me to do? Simply trust me, and let your mind work alongside mine. Together, we will give them a demonstration they will never forget." The countdown from Admiral Korath had reached 30 minutes when something unprecedented began to happen in the outer regions of the solar system. The 3 planets that orbited farthest from the sun had always been dead worlds, frozen balls of rock and ice that had never known warmth or life. They were so far from the star that no one had ever bothered to explore them thoroughly or consider them worth colonizing. But now, those distant planets began to change. It started subtly, with sensor readings that the fleet commanders initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions. But as the changes accelerated, it became impossible to ignore what was happening. The first planet, a frozen wasteland covered in methane ice, began to warm. Not slowly, over geological timescales, but rapidly, visibly, with changes that could be measured in minutes rather than millennia. The ice caps began to melt, revealing rich soil beneath. The atmosphere, previously too thin to support any kind of life, began to thicken with exactly the right mixture of gases to create a breathable environment. Vast oceans formed from the melting ice, and within hours, the first signs of plant life began to appear on the newly fertile continents. The second planet underwent an even more dramatic transformation. Its surface, previously scarred by asteroid impacts and volcanic activity, smoothed out into rolling plains and majestic mountain ranges. Rivers and lakes appeared where none had existed before. Forests of strange but beautiful trees began to grow at impossible speeds, creating ecosystems that looked like paradise. The third planet became something that defied every law of physics that the assembled fleets thought they understood. Not only did it develop a perfect environment for life, but it also began to generate its own energy field, creating a warm, stable climate despite its distance from the sun. Cities appeared on its surface, not built by any known species, but grown from the planet itself, creating perfectly integrated urban centers that worked in harmony with the natural environment. All of this happened in less than 6 hours, while the fleets watched in stunned silence. "This is what I was made for." The Titan's voice suddenly filled every communication channel in the system, speaking directly to every ship simultaneously. "Not conquest. Not destruction. Not to serve as a weapon in your wars. I was created to bring life to dead worlds, to create homes where none existed before, to ensure that all species have room to grow and flourish." The demonstration continued as the Titan created agricultural systems that could feed billions, established manufacturing centers that could produce anything a civilization might need, and even began to show how different species could live together on the same world without conflict or competition. "There is room for all to thrive," the Titan continued. "No more wars over habitable planets. No more empires built on controlling scarce resources. No more civilizations forced to choose between expansion and extinction." Admiral Korath was the first to lower his weapons. "All hegemony ships, stand down from attack positions," he ordered, his voice filled with wonder rather than anger. "We are witnessing the birth of a new age." One by one, the other fleet commanders followed suit. The implications were staggering. If the Titan could create habitable worlds in a matter of hours, then every civilization in the galaxy could have room to grow. The fundamental scarcity that had driven interstellar conflict for thousands of years was suddenly obsolete. Emperor Vex watched from his palace as representatives from every fleet began requesting permission to land, not to capture the Titan, but to learn how this new age of cooperation might work. His fear-based empire was indeed crumbling, but for the first time in his life, he began to see that what was replacing it might be something far better. Damon became the first Titan speaker, serving as the bridge between ancient wisdom and modern civilization. Through him, the Titan could work with human creativity and adaptability to solve problems that had seemed impossible just days before. And through him, humanity became the species that helped bring peace to a galaxy that had known only conflict. The age of scarcity was ending, and the age of abundance had begun.